Hey everybody. Today we're just wanted to make sure I'm not muted because since I'm running everything that happens quite a bit. But hey everybody, today we're doing a live AMA. So we're answering your questions about content creation, equipment, software, editing, whatever you have. And if you're new to the stream, hi, I'm Jesse. I'm a podcast editor, content creator, coach, AI consultant. I do a little of everything. And to my left over here, we've got Matthew Bliss, whom I will let introduce himself.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm a bit of an everything guy too. Mostly podcast editor, podcast producer. Love solving tech problems. Love getting into the podcasting thing. Looking to pivot into coaching, consulting, all that fun stuff around the fringes of what we would otherwise consider what podcasting is. There's another level there where you start thinking about the things that you're actually thinking about while you're asking the questions, some of which we're going to be answering today. And I'm looking forward to a couple of these questions. There's been some real zingers that have been flying around the internet the last little while that in all fairness, like me talking about the coaching and consulting, that being a pivot for me coming up very soon. But if you want to get on board, mbpod.com right now is the website where you can see my portfolio. Asking good questions on the internet is a skill that's incredibly important and that I think a lot of people don't have. Asking the right question in the right context for your circumstances is going to be far more useful than just a general question about general things like what is the best microphone. And in fact, not 10 minutes before jumping on to prepare for this stream, I responded to a comment where someone was asking if Audacity is the best DAW they could use on Reddit, and what they should be looking at to have a better experience. So I said, hey, what's better to you? What are you looking for? What are the problems you're dealing with? Like sometimes if you're having a good time, why rock the boat? You don't have to buy a Ferrari to have a new set of problems when you're upgrading from a Toyota. You spend a lot of money to do a lot of stuff that you didn't need. And he seemed to get a little bit offended. Like, hey, I wanted to find out people's experiences about different DAWs. So I approached the comment a little bit differently. But to me, the question was a little bit poorly worded in terms of what he wanted to get out of it, or they. So good questions is what I'll be helping people do with my podcast and my new client and coaching stuff that will be coming up soon. And I'm looking forward to hearing the zinger questions that we've got for today.
And that's something I see across the board. It's difficult to ask really good questions. And that's something that I think, since I work with a lot of AI lately, I think that's one of the things that people struggle with to get good results out of AI. You need to be able to be clear in what you're trying to find out, whether you're giving instruction or asking questions. Like your example with Reddit. The question didn't really say what the person was actually trying to find. He or she was trying to figure out, or asking, what's the best DAW? When it turns out they're just trying to figure out what other people's experience with other DAWs is. Two completely different questions, fairly related, but the way it's worded really does impact the types of responses you get.
Yeah, and it's a thing that's a symptom of the internet today, where we're all about broadcast, all about telling people things or asking people questions or putting things out there. And you know that this is happening because people will sometimes even include in their Facebook posts asking questions, saying things dismissively like, oh, and I'm not someone who researches the details of these things. I'd rather you tell me. and still have a very poorly worded question that really doesn't get at what they actually want. And chatbot prompts, LLM prompts, chatbots have started coming up as a subject in the things that I look at now too. But yeah, AI prompts, super relevant as well. I keep seeing posts online of people sharing the prompts they use, and they are incredibly basic and very simple. And you ask them about the outputs on the other side, and they're like, hey, it does the job for me. Like, there's no reflection there. They're not thinking about what they're putting out on the internet or what they're doing for their podcast. There's like a little bit of nerve touching with this one for me.
And I saw one in, I think, a Riverside group recently. There was a prompt that basically had 9 points. Do this, 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 and this. And I think that's probably one of the ones you're referring to. And the person said, yeah, a lot of times I have to do additional work, but it gets the job done. And that's where
that was the
understanding the prompting really comes into play. I just didn't have the time. I wanted to respond with a really improved prompt, and how you can use ChatGPT to train it to give you the results you want each time, so you're not having to do nearly as much. The prompt that was shared was very general. Its output is going to vary greatly from one run to the next. And when you're using it for content creation, you want the outputs to be fairly consistent. You don't want to ask it for show notes, and one time it writes it this way, the next time it writes in a completely different way, different format, all of that. You want consistency, or it's not really saving you a whole lot of time. If it's just giving you a first draft and you're having to do a lot of rearranging or tweaking to get it the way you want, it's not saving you that much time.
No. And the problem I had with that post, I don't think I made it clear in the comments at all. I don't think I mentioned it. But the fact that that person was happy to put that prompt in a locked box, like it was in a routine that just spat out what they needed after it gave an input, like it Chinese roomed that thing. That scared me a little bit, like that people aren't willing to supervise. Like, imagine having a company where you had a CEO and like 20 interns doing stuff. You wouldn't want to let them run around doing things by themselves. Like, you'd want to check their work for a little bit and slowly, release the responsibility over the time once they've repeatedly done the things that you want them to do. But here, he's just put it in a locked routine that you can't change and then have to adjust it on the other side. That kind of stuff just rubs me the wrong way. But it's that kind of what's a good word for it? Like passive aggressive reacting stuff that you do, like a comment that incenses you on social media, and you just have to react to it. I find that I'm forcing myself not to write comments and react to them a lot of times without a well-reasoned response, just because if you feel like you have to sit someone down in a lesson for 60 minutes to be able to tell them what they need to understand the comment you're making, then it's not worth making the comment, I don't think. But this is starting to edge towards social media etiquette and asking better questions and how we can be better AI LLM users. And I'm not sure we want to float too far down the LLM direction, because I could definitely share a few insights on that one, particularly for podcast stuff.
Well, I just want to have one finishing thought, and then we'll get into some of the questions we have. And
go for it.
In that prompt, it's asking the LLM to do like 9 different things. Ideally, we want to break that up into 9 different sections or pieces, because if you ask someone to do a really complicated thing, most people aren't going to be good at all of those. Same thing with an LLM. Break it down into pieces that it can work on. It's going to give you a much better output for each section than if you dump it and tell it, do these 9 things.
Yep.
And like we said, we don't want to continue down that road because that's going to derail us. And we've got our first question.
Great stuff.
And we'll come back to this one in a moment. We've got House of Jen. Why'd that move up there? Hi guys, here to ask questions again. Well, that's what we're here for. That's what AMAs are. Other than Soothe, Soothe 2, and fine-tuning EQ, what are other non-destructive DS plugins that you've found work well for particularly strong sibilance? This is probably going to be not much of a surprise, but Sonible Smart DS is the one I've been using. And I think the other thing that we need to really keep in mind is with de-essing, it's never going to completely kill that sibilance. We're looking to just take that edge off. The other de-esser plugin that I've had really good success with are FabFilter's Pro-DS and I'm drawing a blank on it.
Surely you've hit the big ones already.
No, there's one that is really good. It's part of a channel strip. I use it all the time on me, and I can't remember the name of it. I'll let you go so I can find the name of it.
Well, look, in fairness, I don't have too much to add to that list, except to say that what Jesse said before, that dealing with sibilance, you're just taking the edge off most of the time. Like, in fact, today I had I handed over a client to another editor, and the client came back to this person saying that the S's were quite pronounced for her upon listening. I couldn't hear it, but the subject of de-essing came up, and funnily enough, the client, not knowing how to de-ess audio herself, ChatGPT'd it and, screenshotted whatever the LLM spat out as ways to address it. But I was asked what de-esser they should use potentially to try and mitigate it. And my response was just, if you feel like you need it, use what you can. But the edge isn't here. And I think that would almost have to be an exploratory thing. If you're training your hearing to be able to pick up when a bad S happens, you kind of have to find the really bad ones and have heard them before to be able to hear it. And the way I describe a really bad one is if you were trying really hard to make an S echo in a room. So I almost got close to it there. That kind of S that I said, S, 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 S. Like it almost has to be so like aggressively sibilant that that's when you want to take the edge off. And then you have to balance it with how much you remove or, tamp down, but then bring back up to prevent it from being a th instead of a s. It's more of just a getting the best you can, to my mind, or more of a prophylactic kind of addressing of the issue, unless someone is actually an essing fiend.
And I'm definitely one of those. I'm just a sibilant speaker, and the one I've been using is Softube Empirical Labs Lil Freak. It has a really good de-esser, but another thing that really comes into play is our headphones. A lot of headphones tend to have a peak in that sibilant range, so some headphones are going to make normal sibilance sound a lot stronger. I worked with one editor who was using headphones that had a really big spike in that range. And he was a younger editor, so fresher ears, a lot more sensitive, all that stuff. And he was so sensitive to sibilance, he was overdoing it so much that it was making everybody sound like they had lisps. So we need to be careful when we're using de-essing so that we're not taking it so far that we're turning it from an S into something that sounds more like a speech impediment. We don't want to cross that line. And to kind of address your question a little bit more, you're talking about Soothe and Soothe 2. I don't find that... I know that de-essing is essentially a dynamic EQ in the sibilant range, but I don't find that dynamic EQs really work that well. And I really haven't had the best luck with Soothe for de-essing. I know a lot of other people really rave about it. Maybe I haven't figured out how to use it right, but I just haven't gotten the best results with it. Your mileage may vary, but that's been my experience. What I like about something like FabFilter Pro-DS is you can set 2 different ranges, and you can solo the range you're working on, so you can really fine-tune where you're de-essing. You can hear where they start and stop. And I think one of the things a lot of us don't quite understand is sibilance tends to start a little bit lower than people think. Usually I think we're looking at 7,000, 8,000. It can go down to 5,000, even like 4.5. And each voice is going to be a little bit different.
Yeah. And the idea that de-essing isn't one of those plugins that does things that other things can't do. Like as House of Jen has said here, like fine-tuning EQ, you can kind of achieve a similar effect as you would with a de-esser plugin, perhaps without the same kind of precision. But it's just, yeah. And I'm looking at Soothe 2 now, and it looks like an EQ like plugin that has a specific bent towards doing certain things with the curve, as opposed to something that very specifically does a de-essing thing. But I don't have experience in it at all, so who am I to say?
They describe it as a dynamics resonance suppressor. So it's basically designed using machine learning to identify resonances in the audio and reduce them dynamically. There's a lot of controls there that can make it a little complicated to dial in, but it can do a pretty good job of cleaning up the resonances in audio. I've had pretty good success with that in just kind of cleaning stuff up, and in some ways replacing EQ to get rid of those resonances that we tend to get when editing podcasts. But again, when it came to doing de-essing, I didn't get the best results.
There you go. Well, House of Jen, hope that helped out a little bit.
And we've got Bowls Promo TV. My Rode NTH 100M seems overly sensitive to faraway noises when I'm live streaming sports, like cars and such. I'm plugged into the front of a Duo. Can I replace the mic?
This is a hard one.
I'm not familiar with these. I'm assuming it's a headset?
Yes, these are the Rode designed headphones that came out, I think, a couple of years ago. And they have the same capacity as yours right now. They can be plugged in left and right, or one side or the other side. But I don't think this is an issue specifically with the headphones necessarily. I'm trying to figure out whether they're listening back to what they've recorded, or whether this is a question about the mic picking up too much signal in the room.
I would assume it's about the mic, because he's asking if least I'm assuming you're a he. I'm sorry if you're not. Can I replace the mic? And in context of it being overly sensitive to faraway noises, I'm guessing this is a question about the mic. And
if I can quickly jump in and say, the NTH100M is the one that has the microphone attachment to it. So it's likely the microphone on the Rode NTH headset that he's talking about. Sorry, just wanted to quickly clarify that in case they're hurriedly typing up a response saying, no, Matt, it's not a different mic. It's the one that's attached to the headset. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, so we've got a little more. He's saying a more cardioid version. I don't think that it's so much about cardioid as headset mics, but there's two things there. One, it's a condenser. By nature, condensers are more sensitive. I don't think I've seen a headset type mic that is not omnidirectional.
There have occasionally been some, but they tend to be hyper-directional. Like you have to have it very close to your mouth, and it has to be, like it rejects anything from any other direction. But we're talking about people sitting in the observation room of NASCAR tracks and football games and stuff like that. They're very expensive, but they're for a very specific purpose. Pretty sure I saw it on a YouTube channel of a sportscaster who was sharing some of his audio setup. So I couldn't tell you the specific model that would have been used at the time. They do exist. Maybe not for podcasting, though.
And I'm not sure if they're going to be compatible with your headphones.
Yeah.
Trying to think what else. Because I'm assuming you want something that's right there so you can move around. You're not dealing with a mic arm and all of that stuff while you're live streaming sports.
Live streaming. Yeah. I mean, I think sports, I mean, let's empower ourselves with Occam's razor here. The simplest is often the best answer. I think with sports, you have to be able to give yourself a bit of grace and say, the sport's happening. It's happening around me to some degree. You guys are going to catch a little bit of that. Like it's inevitable that there's going to be some bleed when you're at a sports event where you're dealing with big noises and whistles and, you know, megaphones and crowds and all those kinds of things. Maybe this problem gets solved by them giving themselves some grace, just like allowing for that little bit of extra noise, unless it's a post-production issue on the other side. But the only other thing I could think of for the Rodecaster Duo would be gating that might resolve that. I mean, you could strap a deity shotgun to your face to try and get some of that hypercardioid off-axis rejection, but it's probably not going to do the trick. You're currently muted, my friend.
I think I've got a question for you to think about Bose Promo TV, and what's the real problem here? Because if you're recording like in your home while you're watching sports, there might be ways to eliminate that issue altogether. If you can get the audio from your TV into your headset, into your headphones, so you're not dealing with that noise. But maybe the noise you're picking up is traffic from outside, in which case there's not a whole lot you can do there. So if you could give us a little more insights to the specifics of the problem you're dealing with, we might be able to see if there's other solutions here that might not necessarily be the mic.
Currently having a look at his channel. Her channel? Their channel. No, I'm Rinkside. Sorry, I'm getting ahead here. Bowls Promo TV has responded, "No, I'm Rinkside." So I presume we're talking about ice hockey as the sport that that they're live broadcasting.
That would be my guess. And if you're in a live setting like that, what Matt was talking about, the types of headsets that broadcasters use are probably what you're going to be looking for. I know Audio-Technica has a higher end headset that requires you'd have to plug in an XLR into your Duo and then plug the headphones into the rear headphone jack. I'm not sure of the direction or the pickup pattern of the mic on that, but I want to say I read reviews that people were using those for broadcast in sports settings.
All right, I'd like to report in and speak up for Bowls Promo TV because he sounds Australian, potentially. So it's bowls. But the sport of bowls is what we're talking about in terms of being Rinkside. From what I can hear, at least with the one that I listened to, which was one of 3 videos that have been uploaded, the amount of noise in the live streaming broadcaster's mic was either adequate enough that it was picking up the sound from the area like you'd expect a normal sports broadcast to, or they had several other mics picking up the space and that masked a bit of whatever the person might be picking up in their own headphones as they talk, or what they're hearing back when they listen to their mic, just in isolation from the rest of the stuff. So I don't know, the finessing there, getting that Sennheiser mic you mentioned might be a good way to get around that. But again, I think keep things simple. That video sounded great to me, but I'm not a sports watcher, so I might be off the map a little bit.
Actually, I would maybe ask the people on your live stream for some feedback, because a lot of times as the content creator, as the live streamer, we're a little more hyper aware of things, we're a little more picky about everything. And like Matt said, in his perspective, things are fine. So this might not be a problem to your audience. So try asking them if they think there's an issue there, because they're the ones whose opinion matters the most, really. So if no one on that end of things is noticing a problem, you're fine.
Yeah. Think of it as immersion. Like, imagine you want people sitting right next to you, watching bowls, or whatever the sport is, if I've got that wrong. Yeah. Make it real. Genuine. Good question, though. Oh, you're muted again, my friend. That's second strike. Third.
It's probably the 18th strike, but yeah, that's part of the experience of live streaming from a sporting event. I think some people enjoy having that ambiance of being there, as long as it's not so loud that it overtakes your voice. That, I think, for a lot of people is part of the experience.
Definitely. At least I think of cricket when I listen to that. Like, I listen to that, and when you listen to a cricket game, you can hear people yelling, you can hear people chanting. You can sometimes hear when the cricket ball gets hit out of the stadium and hits a couple of cars in the car park. Like, it just feed it into the system. Make it part of the show.
And Bulls Promo says thank you. Not a problem, and thank you for the question. So we will move on to the next question. This is just fitting because we've been talking about headphones so much already, but what should I look for when buying headphones? And I know this came up in another group fairly recently too, and it ties in with what we were talking about with de-essing. The biggest thing is when you're just editing, any headphone will work. You're looking for something comfortable. But, and there's a big but here, if you are doing any kind of mixing, especially anything with frequencies, you want to be careful about what you use, because each headphone has an EQ curve. Some of them are flatter than others, and especially anything that's not really flat in the primary range of the voice. So, like probably the 200 to, let's say, from 200 to 10K, you want that to be as flat as possible. But like we were talking about, a lot of headphones, they have a big boost in the usually 7, 8K range, which can boost up that sibilance. Some headphones, that goes down to about 5K. So if you have a big bump in that range, you might find that you're doing a lot more aggressive de-essing than you actually need. A good example I use is Beats headphones. They tend to have kind of that smiley face EQ curve where they've got the big boost in the low end, big boost in the high end, and a dip in the middle. You're going to find that you might be cutting too much bass because the bass is so prominent on those headphones. And then you go and listen to it in a car, and the voice might sound a little bit thin. Hopefully we're not cutting a ton of low end out of voices, because a low pass filter set to about 80 hertz, nothing under that is needed anyway. So that's my best advice when buying headphones, is look at the EQ curves. If you're doing any kind of EQ work, I strongly advise that if you're doing editing and you don't really know, you don't have a lot of experience with EQ, or even if you do, there's no reason not to be using smart plugins like Sonible Smart EQ to help you with the EQ. That way that eliminates a lot of the issues that the frequency responses and curves of headphones bring in. It allows you to get stuff done quickly and without having to second guess yourself. Because when it comes to EQ, you never know what you can trust, because you listen to it on your headphones, it sounds one way. You take it into your car, it sounds a different way. You listen on your phone, it sounds different. Everywhere you play it, things sound a little bit different. So you start not knowing what to trust because you don't know what's the most accurate. And that's where those types of plugins really come in handy, because they eliminate the need to have that accurate monitoring and the need to go listen in 18 different places. The other thing to be aware of, though, and this applies to all headphones, is headphones will not just headphones. All speakers will compress the audio to a degree. Bigger speakers will do it less until you really crank them up. You think like a guitar amp. Those speakers, when they're cranked up, they're going to compress at those louder volumes. Headphone speakers, they're tiny, so they're going to compress at much lower volumes. Same thing with phones. Laptop speakers. The smaller the speaker, the earlier it compresses. So when we're using headphones, and I know this isn't really about buying headphones, and I'm sorry, But it's something we need to be aware of when we're mixing, because if you mix something with headphones that has music and dialogue, it might sound right with headphones, but when you go and listen to it on speakers, you're going to find that there's the music is a lot quieter than you wanted it to be, or vice versa. If you're mixing on speakers, you get everything set where you want it, and then you listen on headphones, that music seems a lot louder relative to the voice, and that's because of that compression.
This is great. I think this is great stuff because, like, you feel you're over-explaining it. I don't think it's ever over-explaining to understand how the signal gets from the microphone, which is essentially a reverse speaker. It converts a vibrating, oscillating membrane into electrical signals that goes into your computer. It processes those signals, and then a speaker in a headphone or in a speaker unit or in a phone or whatever then vibrates electrically that membrane in a certain pattern to be able to recreate the sound again. Understanding that would be enough for you to then interrogate every other component that's involved in the listening to and the judging and the selecting of materials that you use and the instruments that you use to be able to measure what that impact is. Because, I mean, I went on a tirade in one of those comments, one of those posts that you mentioned in one of the Facebook groups that we're in, because everyone was saying, like, these headphones I bought for $10 on TikTok, they've worked great for me for the last 10 years, and I did broadcasting in college. And I was like, dude, this wasn't even a smiley face. This was like the curve was all over the place. I was taking people's headphone suggestions and pasting images of the frequency curves that I could find in response, so to show them the things that we're talking about here. But it's knowing that there's a bias there. Like, what we listen to or just what we have on our head is a headphone, and thus we can listen to and edit podcast audio. There's going to be a better way to do it. And if you know that what you have has a certain bias, like in the high end, then using the instruments in front of you, like the Sonible Smart EQ, or even just having a parametric EQ that you can look at and compare your listening experience to what you're seeing in the instruments, that gives you a way to get a measure to compensate for, de-essing. Like, I would have that experience too myself in, I think, live stream number 2, we were talking about headphones, and it was revealed to me that my DT770s, which were recommended quite frequently in this post as well, I must say, they do have quite a peak in the high end. And that high end peak can definitely make sibilance appear a lot more readily than it otherwise would. So you have to factor it in. Do you de-ess as much as you would, or do you do a little bit less to make it acceptable? It's knowing that the problem's there is half the battle, and then how you approach it for ongoing projects is the most important thing. But the other side of that, knowing about the size of the speaker that the sound is coming out of, that is an incredibly important part too. Because if people have seen subwoofers as opposed to tweeters, like little computer desk speakers, as opposed to the ones you see at nightclubs, piled up around the DJ decks, the size of the speaker is going to indicate the, reverberant capacity of the membrane to be able to create a sound on certain frequencies. And frequency, it's in the word. Like, the number of vibrations of the membrane, the lower the frequency, the less vibrations there'll be. The higher the frequency, the more vibrations there'll be. So if you've got a smaller speaker, it's not going to have the capacity to do high value, low frequency sound as much as it would be able to do high frequency sound. And so you'll often hear the S's in your phone speakers more so than you would probably in your headphones, unless they're geared that way. And again, you said it, We're talking way too much about this stuff and in too much detail for the person who just wants to put their boots on the ground and start editing stuff in as flat a way as possible. But if you know to look up the frequency curves, like we have right here, which I assume you're about to talk about with the beats, that's got to be your best indicator, right?
That is. It gives you a good idea of how flat or how unflat headphones or speakers are. Looking at this graph, you can see we've got a really big boost. Looks like about 8 dB starting at, 20 dB or 20 hertz? Even at 100 hertz, we're adding about probably 2 dB. Then here at 200 to 300, or actually about 150 to 500 or so, we've got a cut. Then we start getting a boost down here, which goes all the way up to 3.5K. Then we've got a big dip here. So these headphones, they're boosting the low end, they're boosting the mids, but then we have a cut in that sibilant range. And then we start having a boost in the high frequencies at about, I guess that's still the sibilant range. So
but this is the thing that would tell you. This would tell you that you're probably going to miss sibilance when you're listening through these headphones, right?
Yeah, you're going to miss some of it. Because about 6K to 8K, we've got this boost. So it's cutting the lower frequencies of the sibilance while boosting the higher frequencies. And depending on the voice, that might eliminate a lot of the sibilance if they're more sibilant in the 4 or 5K range. But if they're more sibilant in the 7K, 8K range, this might exaggerate it a little bit. But it's not, it's about 3 dB. And how much of a difference that makes, it really depends on the voice. But let's look at a couple of these other graphs.
The other interesting thing with the Beats ones there is that generally the advice for voice is to roll off like 60, 80 hertz, high. Why is that phrase just left my brain? Anyway, rolling off the high shelf. No. Oh, this is a bad sign.
High pass?
High pass filter. Thank you. Doing a high pass on voice is generally a good idea, because if you've got low truck rumbles in the background and weird extraneous noises that you want to remove from the background, sometimes that can get fixed up by having a high pass at 60 to 80 hertz. Whereas that Beats one had a boost in that range. So if you don't eliminate it from your edit, someone listening through Beats is going to probably hear those noises because it'll get accentuated in the signal.
And that's a whole other part of the equation, is that's why we want the flattest EQ we can. So when we have things mixed right, it's going to translate well to as many different listening devices, speakers, playback systems as possible. And that's where doing the best practices of applying low cut or high pass filters at 80 hertz really comes into play. Someone who's listening to a podcast in a car with a subwoofer, they don't want to hear all of that low end rumbling every time they listen to your podcast. We might not be able to hear that with headphones, but that's why we have EQs and visuals to help us see some of the stuff we might not be able to hear. Here's an EQ chart for the Sennheiser HD 560s. These are terrible. And that's all there is to say. Because look at this high-end boost from... One thing to keep in mind is these graphs aren't all the same. The last one had a really nice 0 dB, so we could know exactly where 0 was. This one doesn't have that, but you can still see from 1K peaking at about 3.5K, but all the way up to 10K, there is a significant boost.
And I think this was the bloke who shared a link to a TikTok shop, I think, for this particular headset. And yeah, no, that one never looked good. Very rough.
And then it's got a really big cut down here in the high end. So it...
Yeah.
Basically, this is boosting your Sibilance crazy and then rolling off most of the high end after that. So all you're hearing with these headphones in the high end is nothing but Sibilance.
It seems crazy. And they leave just like a couple of mountain peaks in the end of that higher frequency range too. You got to wonder how deliberate a choice that is.
And that's the thing to keep in mind with headphones. A lot of them are tuned to make most things sound good. I'm not really sure what that EQ curve is going to make sound good, but that's not maybe that's a headphone for people who have lost a lot of their hearing. So it's trying to compensate for that. It's definitely not a young person headphone, because if you're young and you're listening to that, that's going to be overwhelmingly harsh.
Yep. And it could be something as simple as, you know what? We save a couple of $1 million on the production of these headphones because we remove a single component and tune another component this way. And all of a sudden we have a budget headset that sounds great to most people. But as soon as you check the actual details, which is why sometimes those graphs don't include the information you want. Like if they had a very explicit 0 dB line there, people could very easily tell how high those peaks were. But if it's not there, then it's very hard to tell.
Yeah, so the bottom line is really most headphones, they're nowhere near flat. The more expensive ones, when you get up to $400 or $500, come closer to being flat. My personal experience, I found the Audio-Technica ATH M50X to be fairly flat where we need it to be in the dialogue range. There's probably a little bit of a boost in the low end, but like I said, I'm not going to be boosting low-end frequencies. I'm going to be rolling those off anyway. If anything, I'm using an EQ like FabFilter Pro-Q 3, 4, whatever version they're on now. If I'm manually doing that EQ where it shows where the audio is, so I know what I'm cutting in the low end. I'm not having to really guess. But the reality is these days I'm using Sonible Smart EQ, so I don't really spend any time dealing with EQ. I let the robots handle that for me.
The robots know what we like to hear. I think
they do.
That's something we can surrender to them.
Exactly. Let them do the mixing for us. Take the guesswork out of everything. Okay, so we've got Bose Promo TV. I just researched the Audio-Technica ATH-BP-HS1. Reads well. I think I'll give it a go. And that was the headset the headset I was talking about. So I'm glad you were able to pull that up, and definitely, if you do give it a go, let us know how it works out. Because Tara tried one for a couple of weeks, but she couldn't get it on with the headphone part of it, so I never got a chance to really evaluate the audio, how well it performed in terms of picking up background noise. So I'm always looking for other people's opinions on how well things work.
Just very quickly as well, I have seen a podcast that is very poorly put together, but still sounds acceptable, using a set of these headphones that you've recommended to Bose Promo TV with a Rodecaster in a, an untreated environment. So I'm going to add those to the chat in a moment so that they can check it out.
Okay. House of Jen, is there a good website to do side-by-side comparison of the most common headphones EQ responses, like what Matt posted? Or is it a go dig thing? I think there's a couple of sites. That's not a place I spend a whole lot of time. When I'm curious or doing a review of something, I just do a Google search of this headphone EQ curve, frequency response curve, microphone, whatever the brand of it is, frequency response chart. That's what I do. Some people will, there's, I think, HeadFi. There's a few headphone forums or groups out there where people really geek out on this stuff. People will get headphones, they'll take reference measurements of their own headphones, so you're not relying specifically only on what's provided by a manufacturer, if they even provide one. So there are options out there. I know there's probably some websites, they may not have everything you're looking for, but the headphone connoisseur websites are probably going to be your best bet.
Yeah, you would have seen in the background, kind of opaque, transparent-ish, was Sound Guys. For you guys in America, maybe Sweetwater, or what's the other one? Better Photo, BPH or something?
B&H Photo.
There you go. Those don't exist anywhere else in the world. Yeah, sites like that have a very focused kind of audio-driven, community-focused kind of aspect, you'd probably find them. But in fairness, like if House of Jen, you've been through that entire Facebook post, I think I posted in response maybe 6 or 7 different images of those frequency curves. I just Google image searched them. Google image search was the way that I found them. And there are some that are different, some that look better than others. As long as you get the model number fairly right, then you've got a fairly decent idea.
That's it for the live questions for now, so we'll go back to one of the user submitted ones. Let's see, what have we got here? How do I get the best sound when doing remote interviews since so many guests don't have microphones? And this is where I see a lot of people, they just kind of throw their arms up in the air and say, well, there's nothing I can do. The guests show up with what they have. I can't do anything. But that's not exactly true. There's a lot we can do. If someone shows up with a laptop, it's just like using a regular microphone. The same rules apply. You want to get it as close to the person's mouth as you can. That means asking them if they have some books or some boxes, maybe some games laying around they can use to raise the laptop up so it's closer to them. Bring it closer to their bodies. If they're using a cell phone, don't tell them not to just set it down on their table. Have them hold it so they're talking into the microphone that is generally on the bottom of the phone, not talking at the phone, but talk like this into it. Have them hold it a few inches away from the mouth. You're going to get much better sound quality than if it's sitting down on their table. It's all about understanding the basics of audio engineering and being able to guide them through what they're using and getting the best out of it. If someone's using headphones, earbuds, more specifically, that have those really thin cables that go all over the place, especially for someone who's really animated, you want to have them hold the cable in their hands just an inch away from their body. That way they can move all they want. You're not getting that mic rustle that gets picked up every time that cable rubs against their clothing. I mean, there's so many little things we can do. But the other thing is, if you want the best quality, don't have guests on that don't have the right equipment. You don't have to have everybody on your show. If quality is that important to you, you need to vet your guests and say, if you want to be on my show, you need to have an actual microphone and headphones.
There is an additional option there, though. For the person with a potentially endless budget and time, you could purchase and send your guests microphones that you would prefer that they have. And that has been an option for people I've seen, and with clients too, actually, in the past. Like, spend $100 per guest for a Samson, send it through to them, and you might be better off than them putting on the old AirPods. Not a common option, though, especially for the podcaster who isn't yet making money from their show. But just a thing to consider. Like, we don't just have to move backwards. You could also purchase something for them.
Well, there's also a variation of that where instead of shipping a brand new mic to each guest, maybe you buy 3 or 4 different mics and you just ship them out to the guest, include a return label. That way all they have to do is box it back up, drop it off at FedEx, UPS, whoever your shipper of choice is, and that makes it easier for them to return it. You do have to accept that there's always the risk that the mic doesn't get returned to you. So you have to go into it understanding that risk. But yeah, that's one way you can do it and ensure that everybody has the equipment you want them to use. With some of the agencies, I know they can do this. One of the shows I worked with, they would send out a mic and really cheap earbuds just for monitoring. The guest could keep the earbuds, but they were asked to return the mic. So the overall thing we're trying to say is these things aren't completely out of your control. There's ways we can work with our guests to get the best quality with whatever they're using, or by providing stuff to give them higher quality equipment if they don't have it.
There is also, just quickly to say, like a comfort level thing that people can sometimes experience when it gets to the stage of trying to take people through what you've been explaining for the last little while as well. Like it takes simple audio engineering, but you've potentially got someone that you're about to talk to for the next hour and you're telling them how terrible they sound and all the different things that they could be doing that you'll be troubleshooting with them in order to optimize their sound for them. I know I take this for granted as someone who worked in tech support, like both in person and remotely, for probably, let's just say my entire life, Like both my parents were teachers when I was young. I've done it for a long time. Did do it as a career as well. And unless you can get into that space, it's sometimes uncomfortable to ask someone to, hey, just, move that microphone or move the laptop just a little bit closer. It feels like you're trying to make them more uncomfortable so that you can get a better signal. But at the end of the day, you'll thank yourself afterwards if you go through a little bit of effort with them just to make sure that they sound good. And if what it saves is every couple of minutes there's like a little rustle against the cable of the microphone because they have a necklace with big wooden balls on it and they keep moving from left to right and it rubs just against the microphone the wrong way, if you don't have to deal with that, like that's a well-being issue, I think. At the other side of it, you should feel okay being the audio expert and ask your guests the optimizing questions. It's okay to do.
And it's your show. You're the one in control of this. You can do this in ways where you're not coming off as being rude or pushy. The big thing is knowing when a guest is at that point where you can't really push them anymore. And that comes up sometimes when you're troubleshooting with them, trying to get something to work. Maybe they're using a USB mic and it's not being detected by the computer. You don't want to push them to the point where they're getting frustrated or the conversation is going to suffer. So it's about being able to read the guest, but also taking ownership of this being your show, not just throwing your arms up and, well, I'll just figure everything out in post. Well, we shouldn't have to be doing that. If we can address things, if we see a guest is wearing a big noisy necklace and they're using earbuds, let's ask them to take that necklace off. Or, I've seen TV shows where you've got people with big noisy necklaces, or they've got a bunch of bracelets on, and every time they're talking, you just hear that clanking. It's like, come on, really? Somebody didn't speak up during pre-production and saying, hey, can we do something about this jewelry? Or maybe the people on the show had more power than the audio people and said, no, this is what I want to wear. You'll have to deal with it.
Yeah.
But yeah, when I do engineering for client shows, we spend about 5-10 minutes before the show getting everything set up, making sure everything's running smoothly, everybody's set up. And if you frame it from the perspective of, we just want everybody sounding as good as possible, the guests usually respond pretty well to that because they want to be heard as professionally and represented as well as we can make them sound. So they tend to be pretty willing participants in that.
And whatever you do, don't enslave yourself to a technology solution for this. Like if your platform gives you a link that the person can click and test their audio for you, for themselves, and then just come to the session and you don't do any of this stuff yourself, like the platform should know whether it's echo reduction or whether they have headphones on. You are going to be the best judge, not the technology that you're using. You should always be doing that due diligence for yourself.
Exactly. And then to you, Matt.
Yes, to me. There's currently, I think, a chat thing that we might need to fix up on the YouTube if we're going to be sharing links. But what I mentioned before for Bowls Promo TV about a podcast that uses the headphones that you recommended earlier, Jesse, I'm unable to link the podcast through the YouTube chat, which isn't useful for anyone watching on Facebook and stuff, of course. But if you are curious to search it out for yourselves, James Smith and Sonny Webster and one other bloke was on this podcast. It's called the Fair Points Podcast. I think it's even James Smith Presents. the Fair Points podcast. It's a bunch of Brits in Sydney, in rural Sydney, just talking about random banter, really. But from a setup perspective, they've moved from studio to couch to these particular headsets connected to a Rodecaster, and then they eventually upgraded to Shure SM7Bs, I think. So look up the Fair Points podcast, James Smith on YouTube. You should be able to find it, and look towards the middle of the list. Episode 12, 13, 14. You should be able to see them there. Sorry, it's not easier as well. Have we talked about podcast discovery issues yet? Even on YouTube?
No, not yet, but I think that is a good topic for later. Let me write that down.
The black magic of podcast discovery. And why ChatGPT won't solve that problem for you.
But actually, it will. I'm finding more and more content is being recommended from ChatGPT. I'm starting to get my videos recommended by them. We just spoke to a prospect last week who found us through ChatGPT.
So that's the recommendations from ChatGPT, but not asking ChatGPT what to do to get your podcast discovered.
True.
Potentially that's going to merge at some point, and you ask ChatGPT how to make it recommend things to people, and enough people will have discovered it and reported it for that to be the recommendation that goes into it from now on. But at the moment, it's still just canvassing all the SEO-related, what I would call, well, slop's the bad word. That's mostly AI-related, but it's all SEO-driven stuff, like podcasts or like Riverside, all those websites, whatever they say, tends to be what it surfaces.
Yep.
But that's cool. I really like that, though. Like, you'll have to tell us how you made that happen.
I don't know. It's who knows?
That was quick.
Yep. It's happening. That's all I can tell you. Our next question is it worth it to put my audio-only podcast on YouTube? And for some reason, I seem to see this question pop up seemingly once a week. And you have some people say, yes, do it. Other people say, no, don't do it. What's your take on audio-only podcasts on YouTube?
So, I have flipped between these various responses as well, because the conversation has grown and changed over time, but it is still one of those it depends answers. I think the question is also the most important part too. So, is it worth putting my audio-only podcast on YouTube? What's worthy? What's worthwhile? What would make it worthwhile for you? Is it being available on the YouTube platform to listen to, where previously it wasn't? Then yes, absolutely you should. Because there are going to be a subset of users with YouTube Premium who can listen with their phones locked up in their pocket and just hear your show instead of just watching it. If worthwhile is the growth and algorithmic potential of getting caught in a virality loop and becoming more popular and getting more listeners, the answer is probably going to be no, because that generally is how it's performed so far. If you have a static image on an audio-only file on YouTube as a platform, then generally you're not going to see the kind of performance that you'd see from a Mr. Beast or a, whatever other insert big YouTuber that you can imagine, or big YouTube podcaster like Diary of a CEO, Chris Williamson, Joe Rogan, all those kinds of things. That kind of virality just doesn't happen with podcasts on YouTube, and it definitely doesn't happen with audio only. So I think it's really important to ask yourself the right question about your goals. And I think if you were asking me whether it should be put on YouTube or not, I think the answer has to be yes. Just like with RSS, whether you choose to put it on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. I think making it available there, you lose nothing, especially considering the RSS ingestion that you can set up to work without you having to do anything extra to make that happen. It just pops up on YouTube and you don't have to do anything else with it if you don't want to. So I think the answer has to be yes from the baseline, but your expectations, that's going to have to be where you ask what they will be once it is on YouTube.
And that's the big part, is the expectations. You can't go into it expecting huge numbers by putting an audio-only product up on a video platform. The algorithm works by pushing the things people watch and spend time on. They'll try pushing your audio-only podcast, but if nobody's listening to it, it's not going to grow. And there's all kinds of research that shows audio-only content performs worse on YouTube than video content. And that makes sense. People tend to go to YouTube to watch video content. And the big reason people say be on YouTube is for discoverability. I agree with Matt that there's no reason not to put your audio-only podcast on YouTube, but don't think you're really going to benefit from that discoverability, because the algorithm rewards the content people watch. And there's a lot of elements to what they recommend. It's based on who's watched your content, what other content they consume. So if there's somebody out there who consumes a lot of audio-only content, they might be shown your stuff. But most people, they're probably not going to, because it gets kind of boring watching a static image while listening to audio unless you're doing something else. Most of those people are probably already going to be listening to your show on an actual podcast app or player.
Yeah.
And that's where the expectations really come into play. If you want to utilize and capitalize on the discoverability that YouTube provides, you need to put content out there that the algorithm is going to actively push. And that doesn't always mean putting your entire podcast up there as video. There are all sorts of ways you can use video to promote your show and to market it. Shorts are a really good way of doing that. Creating original short-form content that's going to appeal to your audience that you can use to push to your podcast can also help.
Yeah, and I'm actually going to be testing a strategy that's very similar to that for the podcast that I'll be releasing very soon. But to take it to another level, which I think is really important for people to actually conceptualize what the question is. Like we've already talked about where the expectations being the thing. Let's think about the behaviors that make YouTube the discovery engine that it is. It is looking for ways algorithmically to recommend things to people based on how others have interacted with them. That means that there's a form of behavior that it expects and then predicts will be more popular or recommended to you because you will also have a similar behavior based on that. Podcasts very rarely sit into the familiar behavior that you'd expect from other types of YouTube videos. So even video-based podcasts, they will be treated differently algorithmically compared to like a blog or a vlog or whatever. Blog. It's written. I guess you could just have a closed caption video of a blog. But anyway, so even starting thinking about the game of how your podcast is going to perform on YouTube, your expectations already have to start out low. If you've got a 2-hour-long video-based conversation that isn't engaging enough in the way that a Casey Neistat vlog is, then already you're going to have, I guess, lost the battle in terms of what that discovery gives you. But then you look at a Joe Rogan or a Diary of a CEO, and you see that they amass like 1-2 million views within 24 hours. Well, of course they do. They've got like a preferential priority spot in the algorithmic recommendations based on a very large sample size of user behavior that's used to measure what that kind of output will be. And YouTube is motivated to put ads in front of people. So if it wants to put ads in front of people on long form content, it's going to recommend to you most often the ones that people are watching a lot, so they can chuck a lot of ad breaks in there and start selling those ad spots pretty well. So our social based behavior and interactions with a platform that's motivated to sell you ads, sell people ads and show you those ads so that they can continue to make money. That is an ecosystem. It doesn't support podcasts the way it used to other videos. So YouTube, it's important for YouTube to be treating podcasts differently, and they're slowly starting to. Case in point, I did check, Jesse, you do have a podcast on your YouTube channel, which, you know, coincidentally, probably every single video has podcast in the title. So of course it assumed it was just a podcast playlist. It should be treating those things differently. But the real perspective shift comes from people like Valentin Farkas, who I think is in Vienna, but he runs Orbit for Creators, which is a YouTube channel. He's got his own podcast where he talks to other creators, and he's focused on building community for smaller creators. But he had a reflection on the things that he experienced building his podcast. Some of them were pretty standard, like, you know, it doesn't have to be the most, you know, tuned up show in the world. It doesn't have to be perfect. One of the reflections he had is, one of my podcast episodes got 200 views, and it's not 1 million, but 200 podcast listeners, that's still a lot of people. And the gauge of what success is for a podcast on YouTube can be framed like that. Like 200 people, that's a conference. That's a networking event. That's a lot of people. And whether it's about getting your podcast in front of people, or whether it's about putting it into the fastest current in the river of content that will lead to growth, I think that's a big problem in podcasting generally. That if you're not looking for your people, you're looking for growth. So you don't care what people you get. And that's when it starts to become a growth game, and it's not a fulfilling game for yourself. Now that's a little bit off the map compared to what we usually talk about, Jesse. But I think that kind of existential question for podcasting is super important when you come up with questions like this one. Like, do you put it on YouTube? Again, expectations. What do we want from it? And are we getting the people that we want on the platform? You can ask those questions of any of the platforms you put a podcast on.
Another part of it is... What?
Sorry, I thought you were muted. You're not.
But I think another thing to think about is what works as audio only generally doesn't work as well in a video context. Some stuff will, but not all shows are. And again, that's because of the way the YouTube algorithm works. You have a title and a thumbnail. Most podcasts, maybe not most, but many podcasts, they talk about a range of topics over an hour, 90 minutes, 2 hours, 8 years, however long your episodes are. That makes it hard for the algorithm to know who to put your content in front of. So when I work with clients who are contemplating going from audio only into a video style podcast, the first thing I recommend to them is you need to take a step back and let's look at how you do your show. Because if you want to capitalize on YouTube's growth and algorithm, we need to tweak things to make it work better within that confine. Just taking your audio-only podcast and moving it straight to video probably isn't going to get you the best results compared to taking a more strategic approach and tweaking your show to maximize its success on YouTube.
And that's that. I'm glad you mentioned the packaging too, because this is a question that comes up a lot for YouTube advice, and it's kind of drifting over to the podcast conversation as well, which is important. But the advice for YouTube video packaging content is to create that package before you record the video or script the video. And how do you do that for a podcast? Funnily enough, it's actually, you can do it, but it means you have to take a more intentional approach with how you structure the episode, as you said. Like if you're bringing a guest on and you've got a video podcast, you want to have an idea of what direction it's going in so that you can structure the flow of the show around what that context is, and you're picking the topic or the subject that's going to hit that virality loop, for lack of a better term. I guess algorithm would be that term. Anyway, picking the topic that's going to keep people sticking around and listening, and not starting off with 10 minutes of cold open banter that people aren't really algorithmically optimized for. But yeah, it's the packaging stuff is interesting for podcasting too. I suspect there's going to have to be a change with how people are told to approach that in the future as well.
Yeah, there's just so much to consider there, and there's no right or wrong answer about does my video or does my podcast need to be video? I see that come up quite a bit too. No, it doesn't have to be. There's benefits to being on YouTube, yes. Can it help grow your show? Yes. Do you need to be there? You don't have to be there. If you're fine with having an audio-only podcast, and even if you've been doing it for a while, if you're happy with what you're doing, keep doing it. Nobody is going to force you into going into video. It's an option. You choose what you want to do. Don't feel pressured to move into video if you're comfortable doing audio. There's just no reason to feel like, it seems like there's this idea that you have to have, that a podcast is now video. That if you have a podcast, it has to be video, it has to be on YouTube. I'm not sure where the thinking changed from podcasts can only be audio to if you have a podcast, it has to be video. I'm not sure when that happened, but no, you don't need to have your show video if you don't want to. I think we talk about this quite a bit. It's your show. You make the decisions. You do what you want to do. That's the beauty of it being your show.
And don't think in a deficit. There's so much of the conversation in podcasting that is often led by companies that is around the idea that, like, I guess with anything human related, conflict and deficit are always going to be the things that drive motivation. So of course, someone's going to buy your product if they think that they don't have what you can give them. And if you can pay money for that and you give it to them, great. That's great. But if the conversation is around whether you put it on YouTube or not, it's important to know whether the conversation you're having is, this is best for my show. Or someone is telling you, there's a whole pool of people over on YouTube and you're not getting them. You're missing out on downloads, listens, views, potential reference material for other people to hear about your show. You're missing out, which is absolutely not the case. there's been a few Sounds Profitable studies, I think, that I've seen where like upwards of 30% of people that are surveyed listen to podcasts both on YouTube and on another platform. There are people there who are in both places. So why would you feel like you're missing out on a pool of people if you're not in a place? Moving away from that feeling of deficit and the FOMO thing, being there just to be there. That's when you've got an Instagram, a Blue Sky, a Twitter, a whatever else social media platforms. I'm not keeping up with them these days. But make sure you've got your shorts and your reels and your all these things. That's when you spread yourself too thin. It's about, as Jesse said, it's about you making your choice, being intentional about your show, doing the things that are right for you. Don't have some random commenter on the internet saying, I run a 7-figure business where I've got 5 podcast clients that get millions of downloads, and you absolutely have to be on YouTube. There is no way you can succeed as a podcaster without being on YouTube. No, that's not what podcasting is about.
And I know we've talked about this a little bit, but we have to try to filter out the noise, because there's a lot of competition for that big pile of money called advertisers. YouTube is fighting the podcast hosts. By podcast hosts, I'm talking the media hosts. Your Spotify, Captivate, Libsyn, whoever is supplying the ads in your show. There's a lot of competition to get that money, because the amount of money being spent on podcast advertising is skyrocketing. So there's a lot of people out there trying to steer you away from the competition into their area so they can collect a bigger piece of that pie. And at the end of the day, here's a couple cents out of that big pile of money to keep you here. If you're trying to monetize the advertising money that you get from YouTube or you get from your media host, it's going to be pennies on the dollar. Maybe it's a little bit more, but it's going to pale in comparison to what you could do if you were going out there and reaching out to companies and finding your own sponsors. You're going to get more money out of that, but you're going to do a little more work. It's like anything else. Fiverr and Upwork are another good example. They're easy to find clients, but they take a cut, and you're probably going to get less per project than if you were doing things to actively find your own clients. Same thing with advertising revenue. If you're using somebody else to bring you those advertisers, you're going to be paying them a good sum of money to do that work for you. Or you can do it yourself and make more profit from that work.
But the other side as well, the other extra component to that, that not all of them do it, but most hosts that have those incentives with them will also give the podcasters an option to pay to increase their audience. Buzzsprout has a advertising program. Overcast does. YouTube definitely does. Spotify definitely does. You can pay those platforms money to get whatever content you're putting out there in front of more people. That's another incentive for them. They're taking your money from every end, or giving you the option for you to give it to them willingly.
And again, it goes back to that saying that if something is free, you are the product. I was working with a client who YouTube had reached out to them, trying to get them to be more active on the platform. Here's all you need to know. You'll get all kinds of money, all of this stuff. We'll work with you to know what you need to know. But all of that they're not doing it because they value your content. They're doing it because they want you there. They think they can monetize more by having you on their platform. So I'm always a little pessimistic when I see companies put out new features that are selling you something, like the advertising or placement in, like with Buzzsprout. I think you pay and they promote your show in other shows during part of the ads they drop in. The thing to keep in mind is when you control all of that, you're not using Buzzsprout or Libsyn or whoever to do the advertising. You have more say over what products get advertised on your show. I know for me, if I was to use advertising, it would have to be companies I fully support. I don't want ads for just whoever's willing to pay me on the show. It's got to be something I can support, or I can't, in my own conscience, put ads in a show. I'm not going to be associated with that. But then I'm also someone who can't stand ads. So maybe I'm not the best person to be talking about this.
The ad stuff, that could be another couple of streams that we do as well, because it sounds like you've got a bit of experience working with clients to monetize, and I've got a couple of clients that have been exploring it. Only one has been successful so far with a bit of outreach. But advertising in podcasting can be very complex and attractive to people who don't know enough about it. Like if you've been around long enough, when a platform like Megaphone says dynamic ad insertion, Acast even, dynamic ad insertion, you get up to, I think it's 1,000 downloads a month now, and you can opt in for us to insert ads into your audio. Great. You get a couple of bucks every month, covers the cost of hosting. You think it's fine. How it's actually working is that Acast does deals with big budget companies, and they spread their ad load across every single opted-in monetized podcast in their network so that they can then get a better CPM and return on their money. It's kind of like the way you get paid interest on the money you keep in a bank. You get a little bit of interest back, but the only way you get that is if the bank can take your money and reinvest it to be able to make even more money for itself. And that's how it keeps it going. And those kinds of programs are kind of like that. And YouTube is definitely like that too. That could be I reckon that could be another show where we could talk about that a little bit.
Lots of things we can talk about in the future. Talking about YouTube, it would really help me if you could like and subscribe to the channel if you aren't already there. Like this live stream if you've found anything useful in it, because that probably does help the algorithm, help put this in front of other people. It might help. Matt, you're off for a few weeks, a month, something like that?
I am, yes. I will be around for our live stream next week, but after that I will be back in Australia for a month, which you'd probably actually really enjoy, because the time zone lineup is it's exquisite over there for the Americans. I think it's Australian lunchtime when you guys wake up, which is really good. But I'll be off for maybe 4 or 5 weeks while I'll be away, and I'll be back. I'm sure we can line up a bunch of great topics and debates and stuff, and I'm hoping we'll have a little bit more to talk about at that point too. Maybe a bit more podcasting news.
I'm not sure what I'll be doing during that time. I don't know if I'll be doing live streams or putting that time into creating new original content, but I'm not going to go anywhere. I'm still going to be here. You can, if you've got questions, I've got a link here somewhere. Here we go. You can go to tansiasteracademy.com/ask-a-question. If you've got questions you want me to answer, if you've got you just want to reach out for anything, you can do it there. But I think this is a good place to wrap things up. We'll see you next week, and it's been a pleasure answering your questions.
Always is. And YouTube, sponsor us.
Yeah. Anybody we can get behind. See you next week.
We love money. Bye-bye.
Yep.